Welcome. Thanks for joining. And okay, it's about 2 minutes after. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Getting Started with Zero Trust Security, featuring Den Jones and Tarun Desikan. Tarun Desikan is our COO and co-founder at Banyan, responsible for product strategy and ecosystem partnerships. Den Jones brings a unique mix of leadership and IT implementation experience to Banyan as our new CSO, drawing on more than 20 years of expertise driving IT and security initiatives at large enterprises. Den brings a valuable customer perspective to the leadership team, and Den's vision and strategy for leveraging Zero Trust was executed at both Adobe and Cisco, protecting a combined 150,000 plus workers and more than 300,000 devices. So we're going to get started with today's presentation. I'm going to let Den take it over.
Hey everyone, and hey, thanks Joe. So yeah, thanks to everyone for joining. Actually, if I guess if you're in Australia, then this is probably your Saturday morning. So we got a question why you're listening to this nonsense on a Saturday morning when we're going to record it, everybody. So the session is being recorded, and yeah, we'll make it available. So for those watching it at 3 a.m. in your pajamas, the recording that is. Hope you enjoy it, and it might even put you back to sleep. So. But we'll try not to do that. You know, Tarun's bringing some charisma. So Tarun, let's get on with these slides. So just everybody, we got a couple of slides, but ideally what we're looking for is get some chat pods going. The cool thing is I do see some of the Adobe friends there and the Adobe team that actually implemented this. So I was messaging Eric this morning asking him if he's either keeping me honest or they just want a history tour down memory lane. So make sure they ask some questions as well. So we've got a few things, right? So what are the principles? It's good for people. The reason we've put this on, we're going to do this monthly. The reason we're doing this is a lot of people come in and first of all, is what is zero trust or what does it mean to you? So we want to talk a little bit about the principles and really what it is. A lot of people struggle on, hey, how do you do this thing? So you know, I bring a unique experience being part of the team that delivered this in Adobe and Cisco. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We've got some real world examples for you. They are customers of ours. We don't want this to be a sales pitch, but we certainly want to bring it home with a little bit of, hey, what can Banyan do for you? And Tarun put together a really good demo. I saw it this morning because that's how
We're very well
picky we
prepared.
are. We actually want to see this stuff. We're very well prepared. So Tarun, let's just jump in. So as we said, so I'm Dan Jones. I came from, so before Banyan, I was at Cisco for just under 18 months, maybe 2 years. And one of the things I ran enterprise security there, and among the responsibilities, one of them was to deploy Zero Trust across Cisco, where we had over 100,000 people and over 150,000 devices. And we're really making that access to applications and service more seamless. And then prior to that, I worked in Adobe for about 20 years. And the final role I had was running enterprise security there, where I was blessed with many of the people that are on this call, part of the team. And the one thing is we had an architect that convinced me that this Beyond Corp business, this Zero Trust thing was worth looking at. And we ended up doing some POC and we deployed this. And we got off the ground in 7 months, but back then it was 2018. There weren't a lot of other people to talk to or speak to about how do you even do this. So that was an incredible journey on, first of all, how do you pitch this to the executives? How do you get their buy-in? How do you make sure the team's on board, the organization? So we'll cover some of that stuff. So over to Tarun. Why don't you introduce yourself? Because I always screw up this. Is it Desi can, Desi can, Desi not sure? I mean, you go for it.
You know, Dan, I'll just take what you give me. As long as it's not like moron or something, I'm okay with that. But hi, everyone. My name is Tarun Desikan. I'm one of the co-founders of Banyan, and I've been a network engineer for most of my career. I started way back when optical networking was still the thing to be in, and more recently moved up the stack. You know, we've been, just like Den has, you know, we've been working on Zero Trust well before Zero Trust was a clear concept or a market segment. I think we started working when it was just a technology insight we had, and I'm very excited. Well, on one hand, you know, it's been amazing for the business, but it's also the new reality where work from anywhere and zero trust is just a core component of every enterprise's, every organization's security model. So I'm very excited to share some of our learnings, some of why we've built the technology we have, and talk to Dan about how we implement these concepts in real life.
Awesome. And Tarun, network engineer, so 4 meg token ring, IBM MSAUs, was that your gig? I'm thinking,
Even
right?
more, Sonnet, OTN, OC48, even lower down the stack. ATM is like way up the stack. ATM, MPLS,
Oh
way up
man,
the stack.
you're getting old. So okay, so let's talk about principles of zero trust. So we'll jump into this one, and again, we don't want to talk all slides and all slides, but so please
And I
interrupt
think
us
your
with
audio has a
questions.
bit of a crackle. Yeah.
Oh, what about now?
No, it still
Right
has a
now.
bit of a crackle. You might want to just cut your gain on the mic or something.
Yeah, well, let me cut. I'm an audio guy. You're going to hear lots about that ridiculous
Yeah.
concept. Now better? Okay. So you've probably
No,
heard a
no,
lot
not
about
better. I'm sorry about that, attendees. Yeah, we did practice. We did do a
yeah,
sound check. Okay,
we
now it's better.
actually did.
No.
So maybe it's the accent, the crackly accent. So look, you've heard a lot about zero trust in news. It's certainly an overhyped marketing term and buzzword, and every vendor these days wants to say they are a zero trust vendor. They could be a twisted VPN company, or they could be an endpoint company, or they'll just be an identity player, but they'll say they're VPN because it's a good buzzword, and they're doing that as part of their digital transformation and their XDR and everything else that goes along with it. But there's a lot of
Dan,
studies out there. Yep.
I'm sorry, I have to stop. It's too much. So Tarun, can you maybe talk through this slide and then maybe mute yourself and try and fix that?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, no
your audio.
worries. Yeah. Sorry for the audio difficulties here. It might be audio, it might be Zoom. We can blame anything. But I think what Dan was saying is, we are here to talk about zero trust, but we also recognize that every participant in this webinar has probably seen 10, 20, 30 odd articles about this. And we're not saying those are right or wrong. Those are all, good, probably solid foundations. We're just trying to demystify specific aspects of the concept and how you can implement it in your organization. That's your focus. Then you want to try a sound check?
Yep.
Okay, that's much
Should be
better.
good now.
Yep.
Much better. Okay, cool.
Okay.
It's funny. You buy an expensive microphone, then you always go back to the MacBook Pro, right? Okay, so zero trust. So is it a security model? Is it principles? Is it architecture? I try and dodge that kind of philosophy and really get back down to a set of outcomes we're trying to achieve. And we're trying to achieve these outcomes because we're really under different constraints than we were 20 years ago. So basically, the authentication model 20 years ago was just username and password, and as it evolved, it included things like MFA, and that was really cool. But what it always ignored was the device, right? So we wanted to make sure as part of this, you think of it's not just Dan's accessing stuff, but it's Dan from which of the 4 devices Dan has, because every device isn't the same unless we have great controls over that device. And in some companies that may vary. If Dan's a vendor, for example, that might vary. You might not be able to have your device management on that device. The other thing was the evolving workforce. 2018 in Adobe, we had the workforce that was continually not just them moving out more and more and being remote, but more and more accessing applications and services that were cloud first, cloud native, and they weren't internal applications as much. So that whole shift to remote work, and especially during the last couple of years, that has accelerated a lot. So if your CTO wasn't driving your digital transformation, then COVID certainly was. And then during the whole time, the tactics and techniques of bad actors, that continued to change. They weren't brute forcing attacking you. They weren't trying to hack your VPN platform to get in your network. They're just sending you an email. They'll send 1 million emails. They'll get a 1% success rate, and that means they're inside. And now they are on your laptop as you, and the security team don't really get that perimeter. That being in the corporate network thing, it doesn't mean you're safe any longer. So the reality is we thought the corporate network was safe, and I've always argued, well, wait a minute, my house is probably safer because my house isn't as big a target as these big companies that we were working in. Um,
Right. But
so for
now
us, yeah.
is it pretty clear that zero trust is a new security model then? That's pretty much eh, no one would argue with that. But back when you started, was there an argument that do you need
Yeah,
all
I mean,
this?
I think yeah, the funny thing is, and you are always blessed with people in the organization that are supportive of it, but there's always people in the organization that are not supportive of it. And if you had security engineers or other people in the organization that a VPN was their career, or that network security was their historical background, then this idea of not using the VPN was really alien and tough for them. And I would argue that part of our goal was VPN. When you enable VPN for most users, that perimeter is, and we'll talk about it later, right? But that perimeter for most full-time employees, you get full access into the
Right,
network,
right.
and that forces you to then do a lot of network segmentation. So we'll cover that as we get further on, right? So the user experience, I kind of used to always say to people, look, can you imagine the day where you're not entering your username and password? And then think of this, 90-day password rotations, let's get rid of those as well. And some of this stuff, you're not going to say it's all strictly zero trust, but what you're really saying is because of the things that we're going to do, we can enable this, right? The other thing is if we're going to do device posture checks, then enabling someone to remediate and get into the application without calling IT and open tickets, that kind of needs to be self-service. And then the other thing is when we were doing user experience surveys in Adobe back in 2017, we were partnering with the endpoint, the workspace team, and they were basically doing all this user experience work, and Tony Van Winkle and her team still does that today. And in the top 5 of the complaints in the employees, one of them was related to passwords and the other one was related to VPN. So it was crazy for us, the timing of us, the team coming up with this concept of doing zero trust, and we called it Zen Zero Trust Enterprise Network, but coming up with that concept at the same time that this survey and the correlation between employee satisfaction and actual your profits in your business, they were coming at the same time. So that was kind of cool for us. So then the other thing for us is, most people do these projects and they can take years and years and years and years, and you want to see progress and you want to see conclusion or milestones and accomplishments before you retire, as you guys heard, right? So I went from Adobe to Cisco to Banyan, and in both cases I done those jumps at least after most of these things were all in place, at least after we've enabled the capability to flip switches. And it's really now, is it a technology decision or is it a culture and employee change decision? But we were doing these things in months. In Adobe, our first implementation was 7 months. In Cisco, our first was 5 months. At the end of it, what we were able to deliver, look, less friction during login. So no passwords during the login. And then also that second factor, being a little bit more thoughtful about when we prompt for that. No VPN being required and no password changes. Both of those things were achieved in our first hits of zero trust at both Adobe and Cisco. And then improving security. So enforcing a device security posture check. There's a big thing as you go through that life cycle. You're going to look at the posture check and then you're going to make decisions on when and how you want to enforce. So the other
It's
thing is, and yeah,
it's rare that you can see a slide that has both user experience and security on it.
yeah, so this is, yeah, so if you listen to our panel discussion coming up in the very near future, you're going to hear us talk about career growth. It is very rare in your career that you get to improve user experience and improve security. And I would say, we've done both here because people not, well, first of all, enforcing MFA, look, that's not a zero trust thing, really. That is something you should have already done. But if you do this right, and certainly leveraging our Kool-Aid, right, we can enforce things so you can't get to the app unless MFA is enabled. And the other thing is eliminating lateral movement, whether it's within the VPN space or if you reconfigure your office network, you can actually eliminate lateral movement there as well. Security intelligence was something that didn't really exist in our sense We built a security intelligence team in Adobe. I'd done the same thing in Cisco. And ultimately, what they're doing, their life was just let's take data and try and use data to try and improve the experience of the users. But also, the first thing was the identity industry has to catch up to where banking is, which if you see crazy transactions on your bank account, you've been getting a notification for years from your banks. Well, we didn't do that in the identity space. So the Adobe team was one of the first times I'd heard of a team actually doing that proactively, building the workflow to do it, where you're notifying the users, they can go self-serving to a web space and they can acknowledge or decline. And then from there you trigger workflow. So for me, that piece of it was so much fun.
So just to switch notes a little bit, I think Den covered at a high level what the benefits of a zero trust security model might be. But let's just get into what it's like in an actual organization. You know, most organizations we look at today have a ton of different types of users, different types of devices, different types of clients. And not only that, the applications and corporate resources that need to be protected, some of them may run on-premise, some of them may run as SaaS, some of them may run in cloud infrastructure. They're just all over the place. And over the years, what has happened is IT has started out with a VPN, maybe a new kind of VPN, a gateway, maybe cloud firewalls, custom ACLs. But over time, essentially, you have this, it's like a ball of wool connecting your users to the different applications. And your security team doesn't really know which user is connecting to which application from which device. It's very, very hard to keep track of these. And so from just a fundamentals perspective, when we talk about zero trust or when Ben talks about zero trust, what we're talking about is an access control solution that seamlessly connects any user on any device to any application. That's kind of how we define zero trust. I know there are other definitions based on who you speak with, but at least for the rest of this webinar, we're going to focus on this as our description. I'm curious, Dan, have you seen other descriptions of zero trust that are perhaps relevant?
Yeah. I mean, look, going back to John Kindervag, where he talks about packet inspection,
Yeah.
there's certainly that. I would suggest that for me is a more later part of that maturity curve. I get this piece in place, and then later on, I want to mature to that. I've heard people talk about least privilege, and they've said least privilege equals zero trust, and I'm like, nah, I don't think it does really, but you know, each to their own. When we've done this, the reason I think this approach makes a lot of sense is CIOs are continually under pressure to improve the experience of their users and reduce costs. And I think the users' access to applications play from a zero trust perspective. That for me is the biggest play. The other plays, and certainly other vendors might talk about this, is workload to workload, and then they might also talk about workplace.
Right.
So they might talk about zero trust from a pure networking play. They might talk about it from your applications to applications, and then users to applications. So for us, this is the focus. The other two I don't think is as visible a problem or as visible a savings.
Right.
And from a security risk perspective, you know, network engineers and everybody else, those other two, those engineers solve those risks a lot easier than your thousands of users who are clicking links all over the place. So for me, this is the biggest risk. It's the most visible place to save money, and it's actually the most visible place to improve that experience.
Awesome. That leads us to a good segue into the next topic, which is, all right, we understand what zero trust is. We understand where the fundamental problem lies. How do you get started?
Well, you start off with an architect that convinces a dumb leader like me to do something about it. I mean, I think that's where we started. And I remember in the back of an SUV in Park City going to Salt Lake City, and Benzi's just giving me crap about, hey, you've not realized it. And the first thing for me is this top left piece. Our authentication platform with Okta was solid. Like, why do I want to break that or make it more fragile? But then he starts talking about, well, wait a minute, as you get into removing VPN, and so all of a sudden the penny starts to drop that this would be awesome. The biggest concern I had though is we've made all these investments. We can't rip all the investments out. Oh, and wait a minute, I need an army of more people to build this out. The reality was we could leverage the existing investments, we could leverage the existing teams, and in the Adobe first pass, we spent $240,000. We increased the staff by one. We repurposed some people in the organization to build the security intelligence team, and then ultimately we had the core team made of people who were existing, doing this job already. So we didn't have to, the device management team had people, the network team had people, the security team had people, the endpoint. So it wasn't hard for us to leverage the existing investments. Okay, so one hard thing though was selling the vision. We took 2 runs at selling the vision in Adobe. By the time I got to Cisco, them being in the business they're in, they already knew they wanted it, and I had eluded them for already 2 years. They had too many people working on the project with too many differing opinions, consensus, priorities, and everything else. So a lot of pilots, but not broad deployment. So the important thing for us was sell that vision, the people, the process, the technology, get a really small cross-functional team. Sounds silly in Cisco. I picked one solid leader in the team. She built the team around 4 or 5 core individuals from those different organizations on the previous slide. And then we found a concrete use case. In Adobe, the one that legitimized us was when we had some M&As and we didn't really want to join their network because we hadn't done enough due diligence. Whereas in Cisco, it was we had some really core apps that we wanted to get out there really quick. So that was easy. So find a really small concrete use case. The focus communication campaign was more internally within all of the teams, because you need a call to action and you need everybody to have a line in the sand. So for us, a weekly newsletter that had a ticker timing down number of days to X. I can't remember what it was in Adobe, but in Cisco it was when's RSA. We want to be on stage at RSA talking about this. So number of days to RSA. And then look, we ran the authentication platform, and we done a really stellar job on our implementation of Okta and Adobe. And for me, it was easy to inject, well, not easy, because I didn't do anything. So the team, it was easy for them maybe, or hard for them, I'm not sure. But for them to inject that authentication workflow to do the posture check and route traffic, that's the first place to start. I've heard people talk about asset registers and things. If you own the identity platform, it's easy for you to make it a more pleasurable experience. You don't ever have to ask anybody if you want to improve the login experience. That's a given. So the reality is you start there, you're going to get noticeable wins, and people will enjoy it.
Maybe one question here is, there's always inertia in an organization. Even if it's a bad experience, your users are kind of used to it, right? I mean, they're kind of used to doing this. They've been doing this for the last 5 years. How do you get across a hump like that? What do I gain from changing something that has been working, even though it's not perfect?
So it's been working, but I was always getting complaints. The single sign-on thing's not single. I log in 5 or 10 times a day, right? So the problem is, in the mid-90s, early 2000s, people were talking about single sign-on like this nirvana thing, and then enterprise single sign-on, and it was never a reality. I remember a CIO kicking my ass because what was happening was she was like, but we're before we even turn our laptop on, we've got to log in for disk encryption, and then we log into the OS, then we log into the app, then we log into VPN, then we log into app. I'm like, yeah. I said the first failing was that expectation setting. Single sign-on is not real. Now, I would like to say now, as we're moving forward, it's dynamic authentication based on you, the device, and the app, and the risk. So I'd love us to move away from the term, but that's probably not likely. So I think the reality is can we improve that experience and make it more seamless? At the end of the day, we just want a user to get to the app, do what they need to do, and we've got trust that user and the device has a level of risk that we can tolerate.
Right. Awesome. So I think we've gone over some theory kind of in terms of what Zero Trust is, how you can get started in your own organizations. We want to spend a couple of minutes kind of talking about real world companies that have actually implemented this and implemented this at scale. And before we do that, there are different Zero Trust implementations. Banyan, of course, as a vendor has a very specific one, but all Zero Trust implementations actually have some pretty similar characteristics, no matter which vendor you go with. The architecture typically involves three core components. One is the user, of course, the user and the device. They are the ones who need access to an application. The other one will be an access point, and this is could be a gateway, could be an identity-aware proxy. A modern Zero Trust implementation always has a central policy engine. This is one of the biggest changes from a traditional VPN, from a traditional bastion, where the policies were essentially on the server itself. Any modern Zero Trust implementations needs all that policy abstracted away and typically hosted in some kind of cloud-based environment where you can integrate with your security tooling, such as your user identity, your device, endpoint security tooling, and you can actually construct the policies with which you want to manage access from your users and devices to their applications. On the user and device side, that you might have client or client-less approaches, but the fundamental idea here is that you want to strongly authenticate the user and device, use as much context as possible, yet make it as simple and transparent as possible. And then finally, on the gateway itself, this is where the access is actually managed. This is where the policy is enforced. And in today's cloud world, these applications can be running anywhere. The users can be working anywhere. So you really need a global, optimized, simple footprint to provide not just secure, but also fast connectivity. So this is a typical architecture. Most of the examples we'll give you going forward follow this architecture. And I'm curious if folks on the webinar have seen other implementations that are also interesting. So here's a real world case study that Den might be or might not be intimately familiar with, which is a global technology company. And over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, today, they run 30,000+ users over hundreds of countries. And because they're a large global company, they have thousands of applications running in the cloud, running in SaaS, running different environments. And historically, a very network-centric approach to securing these applications. You had to turn on the VPN, you had to be on the network. From the network, you could then hop on to wherever you needed to do your job. They rolled out Zero Trust. They rolled out a ZTNA program in over 3 years. And today, it is just kind of, I think, a way of life, right? The user experience, the VPN-free user experience, and the passwordless user experience is just an expectation. And then maybe then you can talk a little bit about the security. What happens to security when you do this at scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for me was, enabling posture requirements on your devices, ensuring that you're not logging into the VPN and you're going direct to those applications. The big thing for me, and I'm not quite sure which of the global technology companies this is, may have a red logo, I guess. But the reality is you're looking to try and say, look, we are trying to enable features and capabilities for then the executives in these companies to make decisions. Because ultimately, every decision you make has an impact on user experience. It might have an impact on other processes and workflows. And from a technology perspective, our goal, I think, as technologists, and it certainly was for me in Adobe, was to go back to our CSO and CIO and say, hey, we've enabled the ability to do this. It's now your choice of how much political, kicking do you want to take in order for you to do it, right? So going to a company that for 20 or 30 years has never had a posture check requirement is a bit of a brave move for an executive to make, as they're trying to move the company in the right direction. So, but I tell you one thing, we got so much feedback, great feedback on the password list and the VPN, and then not changing your passwords every 90 days. That bit for us was huge.
Yep.
We don't talk about cost savings here, But if you can imagine removing service desk tickets and reducing those, and user time, so that can be thousands of hours.
And I would say it's not just technology companies, although a lot of technology companies are on the forefront of security practices. We have a great a restaurant chain, a well-known restaurant chain that you wouldn't associate as being on the forefront of technology, but they have very real-world security concerns, especially because a large chain has thousands of users, a lot of developers, thousands of restaurants. Each restaurant needs to interact with multiple applications that are again running across different clouds. And these guys had a very traditional MPLS VPN backbone that over the last 10-15 years they had rolled out. It just didn't work during the pandemic. They had to change their restaurants from a traditional drive-in deliver to a fundamentally takeout based system. And when that didn't work, they had to switch to a more zero trust approach. Specifically, what that allowed them to do was that developers could iterate really fast. If a restaurant said, hey, I need my point of sale software to now do ABC so that I can ship my orders out quicker, they're able to do that. And then from an operations perspective, every time you needed to make a change like this, you didn't have to go back to the firewall guys and ask for a change to the IP whitelist, because all the traffic was being backhauled. So very concrete business and cost savings when you switch away from a more traditional network model.
Yeah, but to run, really, is their chicken sandwich really the best? I mean, I've never had one. I'm go as a customer of ours, I really feel it's my duty to be a customer of theirs. So this weekend I'm gonna take that leap, I think.
I would attest not just to their security posture, but also the quality of their chicken sandwiches.
Awesome. I'm gonna try that this weekend.
Awesome.
Now you've got a demo, right? I mean, come on, this is like, it takes so long to get to the good part.
Yeah, well, now, so we kind of went over zero trust security, the fundamentals, how our audience could potentially get started, some examples of, real world organizations that have been successful, small scale, large scale. In this section, we just wanted to kind of dive into why you might actually use zero trust, just kind of give a visceral user experience example. And so specifically, the setup is not very complicated. This could be any organization. We have a small data center, and in the data center, we have an application. It's a simple WordPress application, and users that are not in your office, users that are not in the network, need to get access to it. So I'm just going to step away from the presentation into the demo itself. And so as with all good demonstrations, it starts with an email. So Dan here has sent me an email saying, hey, there's some awesome finding. Click on this link to turn on more. So I'm going to start with a traditional VPN-based setup. So when I click on this link, you're like, oh God, what happened? Okay, I can't connect to anything. Okay, maybe I copy the link. I paste it into the browser. Oh God, I still can't connect to anything. Then you remember, oh yes, this email Dan sent me, this trials platform is behind the VPN. So then you go to your VPN.
Also remember you also remember you don't trust emails from Dan. This is zero trust.
This is the one exception to zero trust. But now I remember, I'm like, oh, Dan, you deployed that behind the VPN. Okay, let me connect to my VPN. So for this demo, I'm using a pretty standard open VPN, nothing too fancy. But anytime you connect to a VPN, you have to authenticate. And authenticating it to a VPN, as we have discussed, I have to enter up. Oh God, what is my password? So you have to enter your password. And now all the networking guys, they have caught on to security a little bit. So they add MFA requirements. So then I need to pull out my authenticator app on my phone. 435. Enter my authenticator. I get back on. Now I'm on my VPN. Okay. So once I'm on my VPN, great. I can actually access it. So it took the user, it was like such a big cognitive change. Here the user was happily reading the email, even though it's from a suspicious character. To get into the website, that was like a good 3-4 minutes lost while they figured out what on earth to do. And it doesn't help that today's browsers are not supportive of traditional private certificates. They give you all those warnings, even though it's just a self-signed cert, there's nothing bad about it, but they make it genuinely hard. The other thing about these VPNs, now that I'm on a VPN, the other thing I want to show you is like all I needed to do at this point was access the website, maybe review some of the trial data. And if I was a good employee, that's what I would do. That's what I would do. Now, if I was a malicious actor, I could do something a little bit more complicated than that. So I know this domain. So let me just go to one of my terminals. So I can start pinging that domain like, oh, okay, I see. So you are in this, that's your IP address. So let me ping that again. You can start traversing laterally to the network. I can start trying other IP addresses. Aha, there is something at 04. Let's see what that is. So then I can start, this is what the bad guys do once they have access to your network. They just start moving around. Okay, I see you have an Ubuntu box with a vulnerable SSH version. Okay, fantastic. Now I can exploit that vulnerability and do a replay attack to get into that host. So all we're trying to demonstrate here is two things. First is that the user experience is actually pretty bad. And the second is that the security model is just fundamentally flawed for what the user is trying to accomplish. Would you add anything there, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, so this is where when we talk about the lateral movement, right? So if you're a large organization and I've VPN'd into your environment, then the likelihood I can move to hundreds or thousands of machines is pretty high. And then the other thing is when you're securing and building out this VPN environment, the security controls means that you're going to be doing more access controls in your VPN platform. When in actual fact, if you'd already done it in your directory platform, say, hey, I'm Dan, I'm a member of the group that can access this application. Well, I've already done that in the directory space. You don't need to then do that again in the networking space. So that for me is a great opportunity for people to improve their operations and reduce costs.
Awesome. So the other thing, which we can't demo here, but most VPN users know this. If you get disconnected, say you change your Wi-Fi network, say you got that email on your phone, right? You just can't get access to your resources as conveniently as you're used to. Everybody is used to this click button browser interface, mobile apps, and the VPN is just an anachronism. So let's switch to what a zero trust implementation could do for you. So I'm going to now turn off my VPN. So I'm not on my VPN.
And is this any zero trust, or might this be our one? I recommend you use our one if you don't mind.
Yes, this is going to use our one. It's the one I am most proficient with. I would be remiss in not using that. But let me open up an incognito tab to show you exactly what that would go. So in this case, I've enabled some specific capabilities, so you see all the steps. That's why the incognito tab, you wouldn't see all this. So now when you click on that link on your email, this happens behind the scenes, right? You know the device is trusted because we've put a device certificate on it. We're able to figure out the device posture using the device certificate. And while you're doing the device certificate check, you also can figure out all the different criteria that are required to access this application. After the device check, you can do the user authentication phase. Again, I just do one MFA here to authenticate, in this case with Okta. I say verify, and that's it. I get in. So I am not anymore dropped onto the network. You do a strong check on the device posture, you confirm the user's identity, and you give them click button access. And this technique works pretty much anywhere. Like I showed it on a browser, it works on a mobile phone, it works on Chromebooks, it works anywhere. The other aspect of doing this is because you connected the user straight to the application. If I just come back to my little terminal here and I try to do these netcat commands, or I try to do my pings, none of those will work, right? The user has not been dropped onto the network. The user is just connected to the individual application based on specific security policies. And so your security posture is almost instantaneously improved. And of course, there are many other scenarios and use cases and different types of applications. And we maybe not in this webinar, but we can always talk about it in the future.
So I have a question from somebody. They're interested in, they're setting up an MSSP to a service at a small business, and how might that How might Banyan work in that scenario?
So they are an MSSP?
Yeah.
Right. So MSSP, for folks not familiar, is a managed security service provider. And what happens is in many small companies, they don't have like a dedicated IT team. They don't have a dedicated security team. They instead use a service provider who provides them those IT capabilities. And historically, service providers have been responsible for things like Wi-Fi network, Dan knows them very well, identity, EDR, and as and the VPN. They have oftentimes been responsible for networking and VPN. But in today's market, increasingly the customers come and say, hey, can you manage our zero trust posture as well? Can you run a zero trust program for us? And so Banyan works with several MSPs. We're very excited to work with others. It doesn't have to be just Banyan, but I think a zero trust offering needs to become a core part of what an MSSP provides its customer. They may not do it today, but back in the day, they probably didn't provide cloud IDP either, but they do now. Then any comments on whether MSSPs should do this or how?
No, I mean, I think the important thing is A, they should enable it, and then B, when they're working with their clients, it's how do they ensure that their clients are aware of what this technology can do for them. You know, they're promoting good security practices, so they need to follow them themselves, and they also need to get their clients to understand what this kind of adoption would mean for them.
And I would say most MSSP clients are pretty familiar with VPNs. I would assume most organizations today, most IT professionals today are very familiar with VPNs. And many of them are also familiar with the deficiencies of the VPN. The industry has done a pretty good job hammering that. What is often not clear is what to do about it. And that's what I hope we did in this webinar, that you can use a ZTNA or a zero trust approach to improve the user experience. Right? You can provide that one-click access without having to fumble around with the VPN fob. You can support various scenarios, clientless scenarios, thick clients, protocols. It is all possible with these modern architectures. The VPN just was designed to connect to networks. We just used it because that's all we had. But today there are new technologies out there better serving the requirements of the modern enterprise. The best part actually to me as a security professional is that you not only improve the user experience, you can actually improve the overall security of the organization. So since we have a few minutes, I just want to show you guys one other capability in Banyan, which is we showed seamless access to an application. But part of the Banyan product is also what we call trust scoring. So every device is scored, and it's scored based on criteria you set up as an IT organization. In my demo organization, it's very simple, right? A good device has a patched operating system, has a running firewall, and auto updates itself. Pretty simple stuff. So what we can do here is, let me go turn off something. Let me make this a bad device. So let me turn off my firewall. So now my firewall is off on my Mac. And what happens is the Banyan app in real time detects that, hey, the firewall is off. And so if you saw my trust score, it has gone from green to yellow. So I am no longer a device in good standing as it pertains to my organization. So if I come back to this app and I try to click on a link, I am immediately rejected, right? I do not have access because we have a strict policy saying you have to come from an approved device with a good posture in order to access these applications. And that's one of the key capabilities. Yep.
And on this demo, it looks like you don't have the CrowdStrike integration in place here, but I've seen the other demos where if you load malware on your laptop and it catches it, then CrowdStrike instantly detects the malware and then reports back to the Banyan app. So do you want to explain a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the key things we have learned, especially as you move to different types of organizations, there are different security tools in these organizations, right? You can start with a basic device posture check, but as you get more sophisticated, you want to take into account the fact that your devices are running EDR systems like CrowdStrike. They're running device management systems like Intune. You might be running entity behavioral analytics tooling like Securonics. And so as you move along your zero trust journey, you can start imbibing signals from these other tools and use them in an access control decision. And you do this not because You just want to do it for the sake of doing it. You do this because it'll improve the overall security of your organization. Historically, if CrowdStrike detected malware, you're just given two options, right? You can either shut the laptop down entirely, or you can ignore it. That's it. You have no other choice. But what if you need the user to go to a remediation portal? What if you need the user to continue to do their job, but not, say, access Salesforce? You can implement those kinds of mechanisms once you have zero trust tooling in place. And I would say the best part about implementing these mechanisms is you don't need a PhD in CrowdStrike or zero trust to accomplish this. Especially with a tool like ours, we've made it as simple as possible. It's a cloud-based management system, human readable policies, click a button to integrate with CrowdStrike. And I think that's how you have to inculcate zero trust and zero trust capabilities into an organization.
And then since I've joined, we're making it simpler so that I can also use it, right? Is that the plan?
The day we allow Den to use Banyan himself is the day I'm very scared of.
It's the day you find another role. I am not, for security reasons, I'm not meant to be in the system.
Awesome.
I've got one last question.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
As far as compliance regulations and how does Banyan help address that side of the house?
I think Den is Mr. Compliance.
Yeah, let's so it's fun. Yeah, so first of all, going through our SOC 2, I mean, this was something that happened before I joined the company, but as I've taken this all over, a lot of our SOC 2 evidence, we gathered that using the Banyan console. We were able to show things like compliance on the minimum posture required in order to access applications. We could talk about the devices in the organization. We could talk about the applications, the MFA. So the good thing is while we're not an MDM and we don't have the ability to change the configuration on the device, from a compliance perspective, we can use our technology to show back to auditors that there's you've got restrictions in place, so you can't access applications and services if you don't meet that regulatory minimum bar.
The one other thing I would add, I think I can pull that up and actually show it in real time, is one of the most important things in compliance is audit logging, is knowing what users access what applications at what times. And what happens with the traditional VPN, and I love the question because I have it kind of set up here. So this is like a VPN dashboard, right? This is a VPN. If you used a VPN, this is what you're going to see as an auditor. I started the VPN. I have some users connecting to the VPN, and these are my server logs. I mean, if it really matters to you, this is the IP address of my house. Great. Okay. So, but these are the kind of logs you would get as an auditor if you use a traditional networking or bastion. When you use Banyan, because we are designed for this, as a compliance specialist, you come to our events log and it's human readable, right? It tells you what the name of the user is, Adam, on what device, what application did they access. If they were blocked, you can open it up and you can say, why were they blocked? Well, their trust level was violated. And so from an audit trail perspective and being able to have some forensic insight into what happened in your network, a zero trust solution is like just leaps and beyond what a traditional network would give you.
I think that answers our question. Again, if you guys want to ask any more questions, feel free to log it in the chat, or you can go ahead and go to the website. You can hit contact us. If you're anxious just to get started, get your hands on it. You can use our team edition for free. And that's up to 25 users.
Yeah, it's our full featured product. It has all the capabilities we talk about. I mean, in this webinar, we focused on web access, but a lot of customers need to access servers and Windows machines and desktops, and some people need a full tunnel. So the free edition has all those capabilities, just limited to 25 users.
Just tremendous. Den hates talking to salespeople. He said it before. I'm quoting him. So he just wants to have a chance to play with something himself, and I completely agree. That's awesome. And then, we have another question from Andrew. Are applications pulled from Okta, or do you have to manually integrate into Banyan?
That's a great question. So the question is, how do we create a service catalog for our users? And if your so we have several ways to do this. The quick answer for the Okta is yes. But that's often the easiest one. Right? If the applications are in Okta, it's very trivial to put them into Banyan. The more complicated one is, what if the applications are not in Okta? Or what if there's a bunch of servers you don't even know about as an IT team? Now, Banyan has a whole bunch of discovery tooling that will go discover applications and services in your environment. And of course, the type of discovery you do depends on the type of environment. If you're running in modern clouds like AWS and Azure, we use their APIs and we use their tags to pull in all the discovered environments. Maybe this question was a plant, but we just recently added this capability where we have an inventory in our dashboard of all the different types of resources that your corporate users are accessing. And once you discover something, like for example, we discovered GitLab, which is a source control platform, you can just click on publish and convert it to one of our services, in this case, a website. So this just happens automatically. So we make it very simple to take applications that are not currently under a Zero Trust framework and then put it into a Zero Trust framework. And then once you publish it, then you can start creating different types of policies. You can lock it down to specific users, specific types of devices. You can create those Zero Trust policies in the product itself.
And then there's a question about file share. Like if you've got a file share in the environment, you can still via Service Tunnel enable access to file shares, different ports and protocols. And that is really different from a lot of other Zero Trust players, because they may only do SAML and web traffic.
Yes.
And the cool thing that we liked about Banyan in the early days was it was other ports and protocols were on the horizon, right? And they're
exactly.
now,
yeah. That's a great question, because I think we demoed a lot on the websites, which is SAML, OpenID Connect based, but Banyan also supports infrastructure services, and these are remote desktops, SSH servers, Kubernetes databases, and so on. And then there are of course always protocols. Sorry,
Tarun, all the listeners can't read that question. Do you want to just sort of restate what the question was and then dive in?
Sorry, the question was, does Banyan support file sharing? Can a Zero Trust architecture support file sharing? And it's a very good question, because file sharing doesn't often run over nice TCP protocols. And then actually in this account, we have something called a tunnel, which is literally for only allow file sharing. And so we do have a capability to set up a tunnel for those specific use cases that are often not covered by the other techniques to enable file sharing. And under the hood, we use a technology called WireGuard to accomplish this.
On that same note, are there other, types of integrations that we know that some of our competition can't support that Banyan uniquely does?
I think what happens is, when I look at the ecosystem, the competition is in very clearly two buckets. One class of competition is we are a VPN as a service. Right? What we have done is we've taken that hard to manage VPN and we bring it into our cloud, and we still make the VPN easy to manage. At the end of the day, it's still a VPN. There's another class of customer that says, forget the network, just forget the network, just put everything on the internet. Just manage everything as though it were on the internet. And I think the reality is the world is not that black and white. The Zero Trust is more of a mindset, as we discussed earlier. It's more of a security model. You need a solution that recognizes that and doesn't just break it up into black and white.
Yeah.
And so we have the ability to do both seamlessly, do it all with the same policy language. And I think that's what differentiates us.
We've got 4 minutes left. I want to keep mindful of everybody's time. But the last thing I want to talk about, I just want to make sure we ask, is about hybrid environments and the Banyan's approach to hybrid, meaning that you're not just 100% in the cloud, that you have old legacy hardware you still have to protect and provide access to.
Yeah, then do you want to talk about the environments you have dealt with?
I think there's 3 or 4 different environments I think of. One is you've got apps that are internal. 2, you've got apps which are SaaS. Then you've got infrastructure, which is SaaS, AWS, GCP, Azure. And then another one is you might have engineering teams. And I think the reality is all of those use cases. So we have the ability to use Service Tunnel. We have the ability to publish these SSH RDPs and all of those things. And from an application perspective, it's not just web traffic. We have the ability to do all of those things. So each use case is treated differently. Each endpoint that you're accessing from iOS, Android, etc., they have different nuances as well. And I think that's the one thing for us is the best thing is you don't need to believe us. You can go and sign up for free and go have at it. I mean, the reality, and I think the challenge, and I forgot to ask Joe before, but I think the challenge here is the first person on this call to spin up a free team edition that gets one service up and running and can email to Runerai, then we'll send them some Banyan swag. I mean, we know the list of the names. I mean, the Adobe team, we can set them a different challenge because they're already kind of up and running. They're ahead of this crowd here. But for anyone who's not tried Banyan before, hey, give it a shot, and we will, for the first person that emails us, we will give them some swag if they get one service up and running.
Tarun's wearing a lovely example of a Banyan shirt, so we could do that. Sure, water bottles, whatever. So thank you all for coming. Really appreciate your time. I know it's tough to be on a Zoom call, but now it might be somewhat unique. So again, you can request a demo if you want someone to walk you through it again. You can try Team for free, or you can always visit the Banyan website where there'll be new and interesting things like Den mentioned. We're going to have a panel webinar with the IDSA March 17th. Just check out our feed on Twitter and you'll see it there, or LinkedIn, or if you're following Den already, stalking him like I am, sad, you'll be able to see it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We've got our podcast, we've got a website. So let's get it started and let's get it done, folks.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.